climate change, what I'm looking for is somebody to blame, rather than, which is a really weird realization actually. I think maybe I'm looking for whose fault it is rather than what the actual solution is. You're listening to Climate Curious, a podcast for people who care about the world but find the current conversation about climate change confusing, boring, or scary.
All right, Ben. Honest question time. Do you care about climate and climate change?
Do I care about climate? Yeah, in so much as like, if we don't care, we're all gonna die, right? In like a great ball of fire. I don't know. Like it feels like I should care. I do care. I just don't know, and I feel like it's a hard thing to know about. Do you know what I mean? Like, I feel like, where do you start? What do you read first? What do you watch? What do you research? So much information. And actually, like, even when I think about climate, that's like something that changes all over the world. It's like a massive thing. And then if I say I care, I'm the type of person where if I say I care about something, I have to really care about it. Like, I have to actually do something about it. Like, I can't just be like, oh yeah, no, that's really important, and then chill. So I'd like to say I care, but then I feel like a bit of a fraud if I say that, because I literally know nothing. Do you care?
Yeah, it's interesting you say this, because I think like you, I care about the world. I have issues that I really care about. And then climate was just something I knew I should care about, but didn't really, I hadn't really found my hook in, like all the things that were out there just didn't really feel like they were for me. It was really at the beginning of this year, and it was completely by accident. I just started to do some work with some climate experts, and then more work, and then more work. And all of a sudden, 6 months in, 8 months in, and I'm getting to talk to all these incredible climate experts about what they're doing. And I was feeling really pessimistic at the end of 2019. And I may be the only person to say this in the planet right now, but I'm feeling more optimistic in 2020 about at least about climate change. Well, and that's one of the things I really hope we can do together in this podcast, actually, is have some of those conversations that, I guess, it's not that everything is okay and we can just chill. Like, it's the opposite of that. We all have to like act really quickly, but actually it's more like, when you realize, oh, people are thinking about this and they have plans and they're working on this and they're dedicating their lives to this, and it's not a futile effort. Actually, if we make a decision, like if we make a conscious decision to do something, we could do something here that could really be amazing. And I just didn't, like you, I just didn't know. Like, I didn't know whether we was too late already or what was being done. And so I feel like I know more now, and I hope you're going to feel more optimistic.
So we're not like just aimlessly floating along, and there is hope, and you're going to pull me through the course of this podcast. You're going to pull me from pessimism to optimism with you.
Yeah, I'm going to pull you.
That's the hope.
I'm going to pull you from paralyzed pessimism to active optimism. That's our goal.
Okay, I can do that. Okay. We could do that.
Okay.
That would be fun.
Well, let's get started. I'm quite happy that we've been talking about optimism and how we're feeling, because our guest this week is the perfect person to help guide us through this quagmire of feelings. Let me tell you a bit about her. I cannot tell you everything because her bio is way too long and it would take up the whole episode. But
it's like the longest
bio. So Charmian Love is really, she is known, and the work that she does is all around the power of business as a force for good. And I think that's the most important thing you need to know about her. But she also has lots of other cool things she does. So let me just tell you two. So she's also the co-founder and chair of B-Lab UK. And I think we should ask her more about that later. And she's also a social entrepreneur in residence at the Skoll Centre at the University of Oxford. So, let's get into it. Hi, Char.
Well, good morning, my friends.
Good morning. Thank you for joining us today.
I'm so thrilled to be here today with you guys. This is going to be a fun conversation. I loved your intro. I can't wait to tuck in.
Yeah, let's start with a really, I'm going to say basic question, but it's not basic. Are you optimistic about our future?
I am an optimistic person by nature. I think lots of entrepreneurs are. So yeah, I look at the future and I have a lot of hope for what we can do together.
Are you really optimistic though, or are you just an optimistic person?
I'm really optimistic. I'm actually, partially it's because, as you said in introducing me, like I've got this incredible role that allows me to hang out with incredible businesses that are actually, creating ways of doing their business that are about creating positive impact in the world. And that's through like the B Corp movement. And then I get to hang up at Oxford in the Skoll Centre and meet all these incredible future business leaders who really care about this stuff. So I think where my hope comes from is really seeing evidence of what it could look like and what people are doing already to try and really build a positive future. And as I said, young people that are coming through, they are fired up and they are total rock stars. So I have a lot of confidence in what they're going to be able to make happen for us all.
That's super cool.
Yeah, I mean, I think the young people, and not that we put this on them like some kind of burden, but I think it's like recognizing that actually it feels like there's just a different mindset, like this mindset of, okay, the world's a bit fucked and we just gotta act. Like we don't have time to sit around worrying about it. Do you find that?
Yeah, I think there's a sense of urgency, right? Because I think it can sometimes be like when we just say everything is awesome and we're all hopeful. I want to be clear because I think actually I have hope for the future. That's a bit different than how am I feeling right now? And I thought it was interesting your conversation the two of you guys were having about how you're feeling and around climate. And I guess one of the things that I wanted to share a little bit is I think there is an incredible amount of urgency and there are some really scary things that are happening in this world right now. Like, let's not be ostriches and put our heads in the sand. Actually, I don't actually know if ostriches actually do put their heads in the sand, but...
Is that a real thing? Do they actually do that?
Just got a bad rep.
Yeah, I don't know. But because I'm trying to imagine an ostrich actually putting their head in the sand. I don't think they do, but hopefully that analogy it comes across of like what we don't want to do is just like pretend that everything is awesome and like almost be this like kite that gets let off its string and just floats up into the atmosphere of thinking everything is great. So I what I want to make sure is clear is that I think what we need to do is make sure we have a clear vision and hope for the future, but actually act with the level of urgency that we know around the challenges we're facing right now and the big amount of change that's going to be needed. So I feel like that's what I kind of really see within young people is sort of the both and, right? Of both being quite grounded in the reality of what is happening in this world because they are learning and really going deep on sort of the science and they understand some of these dynamics that are in play. But at the same time, also really recognizing that this is their future. It's the future for all of us and for future generations and wanting to really actively build something better than what we're currently living in right now.
So I know you've got this analogy, and I want to start there, Shar. So, if we're not supposed to be ostriches, what are we supposed to be?
Oh, okay. So I learned a word a couple of years ago, and it's a word that has just like totally captivated me, and it's kind of now become my way of living life. And it's this word called heliotropy. Heliotropy is essentially the Greek word for helio, sun, and the verb is like trepen, to turn towards. And how it relates to botany is actually the way to describe how plants have a tendency to grow in the direction of the sun. Right. So I love this analogy, right? Because I can imagine these amazing fields of sunflowers. And actually what the tendency is for sunflowers is as the sun crosses across the sky, the flowers of those sunflowers actually follow it across the horizon. And I actually think we as humans, we are not that different than our cousins in the flora community. I think we, like those sunflowers, will grow taller and stronger and faster when we are motivated by things that are full of light and warmth and positivity. So like that future vision. However, again, because we don't want to be ostriches, what we don't want to do is just like be constantly heading out for the sun and becoming derooted, unrooted from where we are, right? And so that's why, again, I like the sunflower metaphor because it is heliotropic, but also its roots are fundamentally rooted to the ground. And to me, what that reflects for us as humans is we need to be rooted into the realities, like the science of what's actually happening out there, so that as we grow in the direction of the sun, we're doing it in a way that's really anchored in like the realities of the situation we're in right now.
Right. Okay, so maybe this is a really good place to start, because for me, like, I'm listening to this conversation and I always like do this thing where I pretend to know. Like, I pretend to know what we're talking about and I actually have no idea. So I want to start with like this idea of the reality of the situation. Really briefly, what is that? Because I feel like there are people listening to this who don't really get it. They just know that something's wrong with the climate, or climate is changing and water is rising, or so on and so forth, without having a real understanding of what the issue is. And I know we're speaking about like urgency and things needing to change and being like rooted and grounded in the reality. What is that reality for us?
So let me try and explain. I mean, because there is one graph that is the graph that I kind of use as my roots to anchor me in sort of my heliotropic pursuit. And it's a graph that's created that shows where we're at in terms of the emissions and how those emissions are driving different temperature increases. And what I'm going to try and describe is a bit of a ninja chop. So if people can imagine, like, we've got a current trajectory that we're on right now of where those temperatures are rising, and it's heading upwards. But what we need to do is find a way to get the trajectory to go on a quite steep angle downwards in order for us to be able to get to the temperature increases that, let's be honest, we actually know we need to go for if we want to have a kind of life to, for future generations that is not going to be full of chaos and, as you've said, sort of temperature rises and severe climate effects. Now, let's be honest, we are going to have some of that, right? Because some of it's already kind of locked into the system. But what we really need to actively do now is sort of change that angle of where those emissions are going. And so that's kind of the reality. What I'm trying to describe is the picture in my mind of this sort of like quite sharp transition that we need to go through when it comes to our emissions, and then how that is affecting the climate that we live in on this planet.
Okay, so when you say that, like, I get this picture of like a James Bond film, and the villain is like inputting these codes into a computer and like is sending off nukes, and every like 2 minutes there's another one going off, and we're like racing to try and like deprogram the computer. Before you said that some stuff is already locked in, some of the stuff is already happening, and I feel like some of the stuff is already happening, right? Like, we're seeing like pretty like extreme reactions to climate and to weather in the world at the moment, but there is time to change the curve.
Yeah, and Ben, I'm so glad you brought that up, because I think this is also something for us to always bring into every conversation that we're having about climate and climate change, right? Because we are experiencing it right now, and there are people in this world right now that are experiencing it in terrible ways. So instead of this like climate change being something that it's happening in the future, it is happening right now. And what we want to make sure is we do whatever we can to make sure they don't get as worse as they could.
I remember when I was a kid, it was like save the polar ice caps. And, we've been talking about green and environmentalism for so long, that it's always been about stuff that's going to happen in the future. Like, we're trying to stop stuff happening in the future. And I don't know, if, for me, a really big realization was that future is here. Like, we're no longer talking about the future. Like, we're talking about right now, and kind of, I guess, is it right to say, like, stopping things from getting worse while dealing with the things that have already gotten bad?
Exactly that. And I think, again, we know that there are people in this world that are feeling it a lot more strongly than we are right now, let's be honest, sitting in London. I mean, there are people that are already experiencing huge droughts, huge changes in weather, floods. There are much, much more serious issues that are happening in the world right now. And that people are really having their lives deeply, deeply impacted by the changes. So we do need to be addressing what's happening right now and doing whatever we can to support those people that are experiencing those sort of very severe climate effects right now. And we need to be actively working on ways in which we can stop the emissions and stop the temperature increases for all of us on the planet.
And can I just ask one last question? Because I think sometimes it's hard to know what we mean by emissions. Like, what do we mean by emissions? Like, I know we're not having we're not a bunch of scientists having a conversation, but like, Ben, when you think of emissions, what do you think of?
I literally have no... Right, when I think of emissions, my mind goes to greenhouse gases, which is, I think, something I learned in school that I don't really understand. Carbon and exhaust pipes. Those are the three things that I think of, and I don't know if any of those are accurate. Is that what it is?
I mean, you're on the right track, and I think actually, if there's things that we can also, I mean, let's be honest, like a lot of the things we do have different forms of emissions, and there are different gases that are contributing to the warming. I think that's what we like, the warming of the planet, and that warming is causing climate change. So it's interesting. We don't really talk about global warming anymore. We do talk about it as being climate change, because the change isn't just warming, it is the change that actually changes how our weather systems are working around the world. And I think you've got the essence of it. It's just there's a whole lot of things that we are doing that are adding to that process that we need to reconcile. Like we need to change them.
I'm wondering, like, so we've talked a little bit about like what's happening and this idea of being sunflowers. I feel like some of this is about mindset. And you said earlier about how we have to do these two things. And I want to talk about that. I want to talk about what our mindset needs to be to actually, to be able to deal with this thing head on.
We talked a little bit about it with heliotropy, right? Like it's this idea of, yes, being motivated by the possibility in the future and being rooted in the urgency. And actually, when you start taking that mindset forward, you can realize that actually it applies to so much in our world of what we need to do. So not only do we need to be motivated by the light whilst grounded, we need to be really looking at a whole lot of these kind of quite traditional binary structures that exist, and really forcing ourselves, and with some level of discipline, to think about not things as an either or, but as a both and. And there's tons of examples of once you start getting into that mindset, how it like opens up the space that you can then play in around how you approach some of the challenges we're facing.
Right. And so, Shah, I'm going to be honest with you here, because I think this is the point where I start to get stuck a little bit, is this idea of doing both. But I also feel like sometimes I feel really guilty, and I feel as though that the whole thing is my fault. Like I am the person that is causing climate change. And but then when I really think about it, I'm like, but what about the companies that are like mining for oil or doing whatever, like the people that are doing like massive scale damage to the environment? And I wonder, in your mind, where the responsibility falls. Like, is that like an individual problem, or is that a problem, like a wider problem? Because sometimes I feel a bit powerless. Like I think, does anything I do even make a difference? Like if I'm gonna recycle loads of plastic, like is that gonna change anything for anyone, or should I just carry on doing what I'm doing?
Okay, well, so this is a great example of let's try and apply this both and thinking a little bit to exactly what you've just shared, Ben. So how I immediately respond to what you said is, you sort of said, well, I feel like I'm the problem, or is it the companies that are a problem? So the first reframe I would say is like, maybe it's not about the problem, but maybe you're thinking about like, how can you and those companies be part of the solution, right? So it's another way of thinking about it. So it's not just here's a problem, but actually, what is the power that I have to be part of the solution? And what is the power that others have to be part of the solution? And then that takes me to another like both and level, which is I don't think it's either or. It's not individual or organizations and like the system. It's actually the solution to how we have to really address this climate emergency involves both and. So I think it is about the individual actions that we take. So we should be really cognizant of them and conscious of them, and do what we can. And we don't want to just assume that every individual action we take is going to save the world, because actually what we also need to do is be actively working towards a solution at a systems level. So I think that just that question you've asked, I think that's a great place to to play around with this idea of, it's not about problem. It's like problem, and the solution is on the other side. So like, how do we think about them as connected? And it's not just about an individual behavior. It's about individual and the system, and how we think about those things working together.
I think that's a really interesting way of like framing it, because I think maybe when I think about climate change, what I'm looking for is somebody to blame, rather than, which is a really weird realization, actually. I think maybe I'm looking for whose fault it is rather than what the actual solution is. So maybe my mind is not so consumed. And I think that's why when we were having that conversation in the beginning about whether I care or not, like, I feel like the answer is obviously I care, but at the same time, it's not really my fault, so it's somebody else's responsibility. When actually, maybe we're all supposed to be part of the solution here.
I want to take us on to some of the work you've done, because I think that is like the manifestation, in a way, of this mindset and this way of seeing the world, and I think it's really interesting. And so I want to talk about the world of business. You know, you're a social entrepreneur in residence in a business school. You've started a number of your own businesses. What's the role of business? What does like economics look like in this mindset? You know, where do we need to be?
Yeah. Well, I think we are living through a moment of real transition in many ways. So, you know, what I don't want to do is sort of focus on just one element of it, when actually I think this is part of a wider transition we're all already we're in the middle of experiencing. When it comes to the role of business in society and sort of economics, as you've talked about it, I think the transition is moving from only focusing on profit and the shareholder to a place where we equally consider shareholders and stakeholders, and those stakeholders being employees, customers, contributors in the supply chain, like future generations are stakeholders because of how we think about the environment. So I think that's a really interesting transition. And again, not to hark too much on the both and, although I keep on it's almost like we're going from this view of like the role of business is to make money, and there you go, to a more sort of sophisticated and complex view, which is actually businesses can do both and. They can both be for-profit entities, which is what a B Corp is, and B Corps are certified because they operate at the highest level of standards when it comes to considering those stakeholders. So again, their workers, their supply chain, their governance factors, and future generations through their environment, as well as like what their business is in the business of doing. In other words, what their impact business model is. So like, what does that business do, and what positive contributions does that business make to the world? So I would also say the thing that also makes B Corp pretty special, and the reason why I'm like so committed to this movement, is because you also have to change your legal articles. So rather than just saying this is what you're doing, what B Corps do is they actually go into their legal constitutions, like the articles that underpin how that business operates, and it changes it to make it explicit that the duties of the directors of that company must be to equally consider both and shareholders and stakeholders. So again, I have hope because actually I'm seeing that actually start to happen in businesses. And I think what we're going to see is more growth, more businesses approaching these sorts of models. And that in itself is going to have a real impact on sort of the wider economic system, where again, we'll move to a place, and I think we are already on that journey, where this is a view that is adopted by many, if not all, that really this is about the both and.
That's so interesting. Are there loads of B Corps? And did you say what the B in B Corp stands for?
You know, the B can stand for many things. I think the B when it first started, one of the things that B was used to represent was a benefit corporation. So in other words, it's a corporation that is creating benefit for more than just a shareholder. But actually, we use the B now as it's sort of own signature, right? And people can bring whatever they want to it. It can be for a better business, benefit corporation. But we sort of just focus on that B as being the letter and standing for what it stands for.
So anyone can be a B Corp, but it's about changing their articles to be about holding the stakeholders and what did you say? The stakeholders and the
shareholders and the stakeholders.
The shareholders and the stakeholders.
Yeah.
Equally.
So I'll be clear. Any business can do that. Any business can change their articles. So that's the case.
Why are people not doing that?
Wow. That's a really good point. Well, we can come back to that one. But I also want to be clear, because to be a certified B Corp, you have to meet a really high standard, both in terms of how you operate and your business model. So, and you have to change your articles. So we are a community of real leaders, and that is a really important part. Like, you'd have to be able to walk the talk and show that this is you've met this really, really high standard. So those are certified B corporations, and there's almost 400 of them here in the UK. I think there's over 3,500 of them now around the world, and this is a pretty big deal, right? To go through this process is hard. Your listeners, if they feel so inclined, can Google Jamie Oliver had a quite colorful quote in The Guardian. And we were so happy to welcome his organization to the B Corp community just recently, actually. But one of his references in The Guardian was he talked about how hard it was to become a B Corp. And I think that's right? It's not something that everybody is, but it's a sort of real signature and sign that you are in a leadership position of using your business as a force for good.
But I feel like maybe this is the point, and I've hit the point now where I can shift a little bit from pessimism to optimism, because if that is, like, I had no idea that was happening, and I feel like if there are 400 in the UK, and that means that people are actually doing stuff, right? Which is a very different picture to the picture that's painted, I think, in media in general. Like, it all feels very fatalistic. It feels like doom and gloom. But to know that people are like reimagining the way that they do business, like, that's really encouraging.
So we're all feeling a bit more optimistic. We've changed our mindset. We've got these great, cool, B Corps leading the way. Everything goes right in the next 10 years. What kind of world are we living in?
What is the world we're living in? Okay. So again, knowing that I'm optimistic, I still think there are going to be struggles. So I don't want to sort of paint an utopian picture, because I don't think it's not going to be everything is awesome. I think we are going to be facing some of the challenges of climate more severely, because we know that the temperatures are going to keep on increasing. So I don't want to be the ostrich, right? And say that everything's going to be great. However, what I have hope for, and I have optimism around, is that what we're going to see, people come together in ways that they haven't before. So I think what I've described in the B Corp movement, like coming together and recognizing that we can work collectively and together solve hugely epic problems. I think that's going to be a process that's going to happen that is going to open up whole new levels of innovation. I also see people becoming deeply tuned into each other, and kindness being something we see as like a core value, a core part of who we are. We become kind to one another in ways that I think will be different than in some ways where how kindness is in the world right now. I mean, then don't get me wrong, there are clearly areas where we're seeing kindness, but I feel like that's going to be something that will be more widespread. And I also, with that kindness comes a sense of courage, and I think we will also see the recognition that we need to take bold action. And I think by being more connected to one another, we will gain courage to take greater, bolder action that we know is going to be needed. And part of that comes from a poem, if I may, because like it's a poem that's really been deeply embedded in our family values, in our family. So it was like from my great grandmother or grandfather who found this poem, and he carved it on a mantelpiece that has then been passed down through the generation. And the lines of the poem are: two things stand like stone, kindness in another's trouble and courage in your own. So again, I really feel like the future is going to be that kindness and that courage to solve the problems. And lastly, I think the other thing I just want to say, because I think the world that I want my kids to live in, I want it to be kind, I want it to be courageous, and I want it to be full of culture and creative energy. And I feel like that's one of the things that I'm really hopeful around, is that we will see more and more arts and culture, and that like the creativity that comes from innovation and like bringing out our true selves and like what we've got inside of us, that in addition to the technologies that are going to be needed to sort of help us with this climate emergency, we're just going to have an explosion of music and writing and art and cooking, like all these amazing multi-sensory experiences that we as humans, I think, like value. And in some ways, to your point, earlier, I think sometimes some of that stuff has been softened in our world, and yet that's the stuff that gives us joy and makes us human. And I'm really hopeful that the world that we're going to create is going to have a lot more space for that.
There's something that you said there that I really love, which is that there's a real need for innovation, but you don't know what those technologies will be. Do you know what I mean? Like, because I feel like then it means that it's not your job to do it. Like, it's everyone's job to think creatively and to create new ways of tackling this issue. And you also spoke about like art and cooking and things that like I wouldn't necessarily immediately associate with climate change, which I think is really important. And kind of leads me on to another question I wanted to ask, which is for the people who are listening, like the average Joes who are listening, who don't, who've never studied this stuff, who have never thought about it beyond watching David Attenborough or what they see on TV or whatever it might be. And people who are feeling like really motivated by the stuff that you've said. What are some concrete actions that those people can take? Like, what are the things that we can do practically?
But when it comes to us, like, as people, and again, this is both people and systems. I mean, the things that I think your listeners can consider doing is, number one, start talking to people about what they're thinking and asking questions. But like, ultimately, this has to become a social and a cultural issue. And part of that means that we just need to be really open about talking about how we're feeling and how we're doing and what we think. And I think your podcast is a really great example of that, right? Like you guys are taking that step, and hopefully others will be inspired by it and take the similar step. And whether it's at, around your family dinner room table, I know we're not spending as much time in pubs obviously right now, but when we go back to pubs and, when we're having dinners with friends, it's like, talk about this stuff, talk about it. Because I think that's how we will make it social and cultural.
And now, it's time for our climate confessions. Let's fess up to the bad habits we just can't kick.
So we're at the end of the episode, and this is where we like to open up our climate confessions to let our amazing speakers who, are experts like you, who are in this, who are doing this work every day, maybe just, tell us a little bit about some of the things, or one thing that maybe you're not so good at. And I can start and I can say that I have a new recent coffee addiction, and nowhere is taking reusable coffee cups, and I don't like the coffee I make at home. And so I am using too many of those plastic tops. That is my climate confession for the week.
That's
I know.
terrible.
Keep in mind that Ben and I do have to come up with like one of these every week. So they may not seem massive, but they will add up.
Mine is big.
Yeah.
Mine is massive. Mine is I know fast fashion is really, really bad. Like, I know it's terrible and you shouldn't buy clothes that are like not sustainable and you can't like reuse and whatever. But the best boxes are in H&M, and I buy them all the time. And like whenever, like those are my favorite boxes to wear. They're the most comfortable and they're like super cheap, and like they get thrown away all the time, but I just keep buying them and I can't stop, and it's really bad. And I'm going to change it. I will, I promise. But I just need to think. I'm going to go and make your money now and figure it out. What's yours, Shah?
Well, I actually have a few. So you guys have only given one, and now I feel bad that I'm going to have a whole like laundry list of things. But I have a drawer of technology that I don't use anymore. And it's a big drawer. So old iPods, old like laptops that have things broken that just, yeah. So I have, unfortunately, I am part of the e-waste problem because of that. And although I will say, having recognized that through this confession, I feel like I am feeling motivated to do something about it. So I know that there's a lot of precious minerals that are embedded in those things that are in that drawer. And I'm feeling kind of now compelled to figure out how I can put those back in a sort of more circular system. I also have a little bit of a thing about neon colored sunglasses. Yeah, so I've got a pair here. I don't know. I kind of turned 40 and I was like, I just want to like wear bright colors. And actually this has been my thing, which is, neon like plastic sunglasses, which I have now a few pairs of, which is probably bad for the plastic, and the chemicals that make sunglasses neon colored are probably not so good for the world.
Great for the fashion.
So
great for the looks.
Yeah. And I could keep on going, actually. You know, I dye my hair. I'm trying to find more organic products to do that. But yeah, like that's something that I also know is part of like how I live. We're getting really personal here.
I was going to say, I think you may have to stop because I think people are going to be like, wait, I can't dye my hair.
Well, you can with organic and like regenerative with dyes, and so that like I'm on a journey to try and find a good regenerative organic hair dye.
If you find one, you're going to have to let us know so we can let everyone know who now is panicking that they can't dye their hair. Okay, thank you so much, Shar, for that. It's been such a pleasure to chat with you,
massive.
and what a great way for us to kick off Climate Curious and be more sunflower.
Thank you for sharing so openly and so honestly as well. Like, I feel like it's really important that, like for people like me who don't know very much, it's really important to know that the people who are doing this work are human. Do you know what I mean? Like, they are actual real people with real thoughts and real feelings, and who dye their hair in really bad ways and are also destroying the environment. So I'm joking. I really appreciate that. I thank you so much for sharing. Thanks for joining us this week. If you enjoyed what you listened to today, please rate and subscribe and share the episode with a curious friend. Join the conversation on socials using the hashtag ClimateCuriousPod and let us know what you want to hear about next time. You can find us online at TEDx London.
This podcast was made possible by TEDx London's headline partner, City. City is all about progress and supporting great ideas. And for the past 5 years, they've supported us to bring world-changing ideas to the TEDx London stage. Now they're taking it to the next level by supporting this new podcast. Thanks, City. This episode was produced by Josie Coulter, curation and research by Tara Cooper, engineered and mixed by Ben Beheshti, artwork designed by Sabrina Russo and Rebecca Mingus, music composed by Ben the Falcon Beheshti, presented by Maryam Pasha and Ben Hurst.